Yes, yes, this is a fertile land, and we will thrive. We will rule over all this land, and we'll call it this land. I think we should call it your grave. Oh, curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal. I'm an evil liar. Arr.
Eric? Eric?
Yeah.
Hey,
Hey,
what are you doing?
I'm doing the intro to the thing we're doing.
Oh, okay.
What are we doing, Jim?
Inevitable betrayal.
Very good. No betrayal. Arr.
Hey minions, welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price.
I'm Sarah Traeger.
And I'm Eric Glassy.
And this is Inevitable Betrayal, where we actually talk about something other than Smash Up. Today we're going to be talking about Mystic Vale. Mystic Vale is a popular card crafting game published by AEG that came out in 2016 and is still being played and supported today.
This is one of my all-time favorite games. The AEG has followed up with 3 small box expansions and then 1 very big box expansion that doubles as like a storage unit as well as like some small expansion material. It's normally a 2 to 4 player game, but if you have the Conclave, which is the big expansion, then you can take it all the way up to 6 players.
And this is a 2-part video, so we're going to be talking about everything that came before Conclave, and then we'll be talking about Conclave and Twilight Garden at a later time.
So before we really dive into all the different expansions, let's talk about the main game real quickly. Can I give an overview about it?
Yeah, and I hear that this game has a really interesting story behind it.
Yeah, so John Clare, the designer of this game, before he started making games, before he was published with AEG, he came to them and he said, hey, I have an idea for a game. And he started to lay out, all the, and then you do this, and this is how this works. And he laid everything out on the table for him, and they took it all in, and they said, okay, we really like it. It's good. But it's way too much. We're going to chop this down into smaller pieces. And so they actually laid out a production schedule that would allow players who'd never been even introduced to the card crafting concept before to kind of take in the game in smaller, manageable pieces. That production schedule included the base game and the first couple of small box expansions. So if you're not familiar with the game, the small box expansions, the first one just adds more cards. It doesn't change the mechanics or anything like that. The next 2 add new mechanics to the game. And then, like we said, the Conclave and Twilight Garden, which were the following 2, those change it up like significantly. And then on top of this, he also produced a game that was on Kickstarter earlier this year called Edge of Darkness, which is set in the same universe and used a lot of the same style of the game, the card crafting and stuff like that. It's a different type of game. It's worker placement, and you don't need one to play the other or anything like that, but it's all set in the same universe. And according to this story that I'd heard, John Clare had brought all of that to AEG as one big thing, and they chopped it up into several smaller bits to help us to ingest it a little bit more manageably.
So let's talk about the base game. This is a card crafting game, and what that means is it's a deck building game where you're actually going to be creating your own cards. One of the great things about Mystic Vale is that the number of cards in your deck never actually changes. Many of them are blank, some of them are good, some of them are bad, but they'll be evolving over time because what you purchase actually gets sleeved into the card itself with transparent cards. Each card has 3 slots, a top, a middle, and a bottom, and you can only sleeve over an open spot. So one of the best things about this game is that it asks the question, do you want to create the uber powerful card and have a couple of really good cards, or do you want to spread it out and make sure that no matter what you get, you're going to get something of value? Yeah.
I will argue that's actually not the greatest part about the game.
What is the greatest part about the game?
The greatest part of the game is the reduction of analysis paralysis.
I'm going to actually argue that's a weakness of the game, but we'll get to that in a second.
We're going to have some arguments.
Let's talk a little bit more about that.
So, Mystic Vale is also a push your luck game. And what that means is, at a certain point, you're going to have to stop your turn and decide whether or not to go forward. This is what's called busting. And if you bust, you're not going to be able to proceed to your harvest phase, which is when you actually activate the abilities on cards and get to purchase more cards. At some point, you'll have to decide, should I stay or should I go? And if you go a little bit too far, you're going to lose everything. Let's talk about that.
Okay. So like Jim said, on your turn you'll have a deck of cards, and you'll be turning over cards from that deck into what's called a field. So you're laying these cards out in front of you in this field, and there are different symbols on the cards that do different things, but there's a particular symbol called decay, and you can only ever have 3 decay showing at any one time. So if I have 2 in my field and then I turn over another card and it has decay on it, it stops. It becomes my on-deck card. It's not part of my field this turn. I can't use it. It becomes my on-deck card. It just kind of hangs out there for until I decide what I'm going to do. If I want to, I can take everything I've got in my field and I can use it to make purchases and to sleeve advancements that turn, or I could push my luck a little bit and I could take my on-deck card and put it into my field. But the catch here is that the very next card I have to flip over, if it also has decay on it, I will spoil. Spoiling is going to cause me to lose my turn entirely. All the cards that are in my field, no matter how good they are, no matter how much I want to play them, are going to be sent to my discard pile, and I'm not going to get to use them. There is a minor incentive, I guess, or what's it called when you have a thing that makes it better?
Silver lining.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, there's a little bit of silver lining in that if I do bust on my turn, I have this token that I can turn over and it will allow me to bank mana, which is one of the monetary sources in the game, for a future turn. Now, normally you can't bank any mana, so this is the only way to save mana between turns. But that can be a very small pittance compared to what all the good stuff in your field would have done for you if you would have just carried out your turn without pushing and then spoiling.
And it's funny because you will spoil often. You have 20 cards in your deck, and 9 of them at the start are going to have decay symbols. So
if you spoil often, you're playing the game wrong.
That is not true, actually.
There are different strategies, right? So we could spoil often, and it could do good things for us depending on how you build your deck and how you're playing. But you could also spoil often, and that might not be that great for you depending on, again, how you've built your deck and how you're using the spoiling mechanic. If you use it well, it can be to your advantage sometimes. But if you're not using it very well, then yeah, you're going to fall behind.
So where does this sit on your list of favorite games?
This is definitely in my top 10. It's probably in my top 5. Yeah, I'd say it's probably my top 5.
And you have all the content for it?
I do. I have everything that has ever come out for this game. I have all of the product that you could purchase. I have promos, like all the promos that have ever come out. There was an event kit that came out, I don't know, a year or 2 ago. I have everything from that event kit. Yeah, I've got everything ever for this game. I love this game.
And where does this rank for you?
Definitely in my top 10. It depends. So I don't base games just by themselves. I base games on my ability to play them with other people. So if a game doesn't play well with my group of friends, then it doesn't rank as high. But if a game does really well with my group of friends, then it ranks higher. So it depends. This one has been hit and miss. Sometimes the people can influence it. So if they have a lot of analysis paralysis, which is one of my biggest pet peeves, not my biggest, just one of them, it can cause me to not enjoy the game as much. And so this game mechanic is, I felt, designed to reduce the amount of analysis paralysis, because basically you prepare your field at the end of your turn, and so while you're doing that, while you're flipping over your 3, because you don't push until the beginning of your turn, you can kind of see what's out there, see what you have, analyze how much mana you have and what all your benefits and perks you have, and you can look at what's available to purchase. And yeah, 1 card might be gone, 2 cards might be gone, but for the most part, by the time it gets to your turn, you should have an idea of what you have and what you can purchase. And so you should know if you need a push or not. And at the same time, you should also know how much decayed fields are in your discard pile. So you should know statistically your chances of spoiling. So at that point, it's just a simple matter of math and going, do I need this, and is the value there to push or not?
How often do you count only once?
How much spoil I have in my...
Eric is saying that you know exactly what you have. How often do you count exactly once?
I usually count, if I'm calculating that much on a turn about whether or not I need to push or not, I usually count at least 2 or 3 times. And then on top of that, if you can actually add cards that have decay on them to your cards as well. So it's not just necessarily the 9 that you start with. You could also have added some in. So if you forget about those, or if you're trying to remember how many you added or whatever, it can take a little bit longer than just, oh, there's 9 in there and I've played out 4.
And there's also growth symbols that will cancel out decay.
That's true.
That makes it more things for you to keep track of, and
Yeah.
people will be like, you would have spoiled, and it's like, no, I didn't, because I have these growth symbols.
Yeah.
And you also have to look at your veils as well.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of paralysis there.
You don't analyze all that real quickly?
You have to count multiple times. And also, if you are paying attention to what you are doing, then you're not paying attention to what everybody else is doing. And now I want to ask, how important is it to you to watch what other people are doing?
For me, it's pretty important, and I know we're only talking about the base game here, but this is actually one of my drawbacks for the Conclave expansion.
We'll talk about the expansions as well, too.
Okay, all right, cool. Well, so the Conclave expansion actually increases the player count all the way up to 6. And with 6 players, they recommend that you use something called the Equinox variant, which splits the marketplace into 2 sides. And so you, on your turn, you're going to be buying from one side while another player is buying from the other side. And for me, this means that like so much player interaction has just seeped right out of the game with the Equinox variant, because while I would really like to be paying attention to what you're doing on your turn, most often, because there's a bit of a social pressure to not take a long time on your turn, I don't feel like I have the liberty to watch what you do on your turn and then also make an intelligent move on my turn as well.
So I'm going to just come out and say that I really like this game. It could be in my top 10, but there are some problems with it that keep it out of my top 10. And one of them is going to be the fact that I have absolutely no confidence in other people's ability to accurately measure what they have. I am convinced that multiple times during a game, newer players will make mistakes and miscount. They'll either spoil and not realize it, or they'll be wrong about their mana, or they'll do the helmets wrong and the guardian symbol. The guardian symbol is something that you can add to your cards, and you'll get certain abilities based on the number of helmets that you have.
The guardian symbol is one of my favorite things about this game, actually.
Mine too, but I know that people are going to make mistakes, and it really makes a difference, because if they are buying a card that they should not be buying, that's going to be problematic, particularly if they're buying Veils that they shouldn't afford.
Yeah.
Well, that's just any game you can do it wrong. I mean,
no, the game incentivizes you. The game tells you to prep on other players' turns, so you're supposed to be doing your own thing, and you're not actively watching them. And also, you don't know what other people are buying, which is problematic, because there's a couple of leaders that actually are influenced by what your players to your left and right
but
are
we're talking
doing.
about that later.
Yeah, and you're speaking of a distrust.
We said expansion. This is before Conclave. That's fair game.
We're explaining it before Conclave. Okay.
Well, I talked about Conclave.
So then you're wrong. I'm not wrong.
I think that
we don't hold back an inevitable betrayal.
I think that while I can totally see your point, I don't necessarily concede it, because I think that's more of a personal issue than it is an issue with the game.
You don't know the cards that I'm buying. If you're prepping during my phase, you don't see what I'm buying.
And that's why I don't like the Equinox variant.
Right.
I really dislike the Equinox variant for a couple of different reasons, and that's definitely one of them. But I think if we carry out our turns in the manner in which we're supposed to, which is that we plant our fields at the end of our turn while the next person is going, I don't feel like taking the cards off the top of your deck and putting them into your field is so demanding mentally that you cannot also pay attention to what the next player is doing. Now, if you're like completely focused on what's going on right here, then yeah, you're gonna miss what other players are doing, and that is not good. You need to know what other players are buying. You need to know what veils they've got. You need to know if we're using leaders and the amulets and stuff like that. You need to know how they're interacting with all of their stuff. But like I said, I do feel like you can prep for the next turn while you're paying attention to what other players are doing.
I'm going to make a counterpoint to both of you guys.
Okay.
Oh, wait, guy and go. So let's assume a given where every player is going to play correctly. Everybody's going to count their mana correctly. Is going to count their guardian uses correctly. Let's make that assumption for the sake of this argument I'm about to make, that all that everybody's going to do correctly.
Okay.
All right, I know that's a big leap for you, but let's make that assumption. Now, what can I do on my turn besides buying cards that can affect you, or vice versa?
So
besides buying a card that I may want. Granted, there's still going to be a pile of victory points that once those are gone. And we've got to manage your own victory points. But besides seeing how much victory points you're gathering, there's no direct, you can't affect my fields.
It's not about affecting the fields, it's about knowing what's going to be in your field. So victory points are a clear spot. If you don't realize that people are buying the victory point cards, you don't know that the end of the game is rapidly approaching, and that's going to be a big problem. If you don't know that you're purchasing spirit symbols, you may think that you have a monopoly on the Vales because no one else is getting the spirit symbols. You have to know what other people are buying, and it's really hard to do that if you are constantly prepping, particularly if your prep phase is taking a long time.
Okay, hold on. You're having troubles counting your mana, and now you want to count everybody else's spirit points
No,
and
it's
victory
not.
points?
It's knowing that.
Are you kidding me?
It's about having access to it.
Having access doesn't mean you remember it. You're having trouble just with your own cards in front of you.
If they have no yellow, then I know they can't buy that Vale. I don't have to buy that Vale this turn.
Okay, so you're talking
and there is, so for our viewers, if you're not familiar with this game, there is a hard limit on how much you can buy. I can only ever buy, unless I have cards that say otherwise, I can only ever buy at most 2 Vales and 2 of the advancements to sleeve into my deck. So if I can afford 3 Vales, like Jim says, and I know that my opponent doesn't have the symbols to be able to afford one of them, well, I'll leave that for the next turn, and I'll buy the 2 that I can afford, knowing that that one will still be there by the time it gets back to me. So I could see where that's important.
So I played this last night with the 2-player game. It should be the easiest for me to actually keep track of what people are doing. I can name 3 cards that he purchased over the course of the entire game.
Also, though, your brain is like a computer.
Right, so that means if it is like a computer and I can only remember 3 things, that is not going well in the game's favor.
But that's like more than 24 hours later, right? I can't even tell you what I had for lunch today, so...
It's an issue for me, and it is something very noticeable where, there are certain times where multiplayer solitaire is a good thing. This isn't multiplayer solitaire, but the game kind of pushes you in that direction, and I think that is a problem.
But I like that aspect because that evens the playing field. I have horrible memory issues. I have brain damage here, like literally physical brain damage. I've been hit. So, having the inability for you to be able to figure out and remember everything that I purchased, especially in a more than 2-player game, is more advantageous to me. It levels playing field between me and you.
Watch your mic.
Than it would be normally. Then a game like Smash Up, where you memorize every single card.
I still think that, and this was my general point with your brain as a computer comment, is that is a personal thing about individual players, right? And we will never have an exactly level playing field because each person brings to the table their own weaknesses and strengths. Right? So
like
maybe
I can usually
Jim
convince everybody to target Jim when you can actually target someone.
Maybe Jim can remember all of the stuff that he does on his turn plus half of what you do on your turn. I'm not going to be able to remember that. You're not going to be able to remember that. So that's one of his strengths, right? But maybe one of his weaknesses is an area where we would shine, So I think that any game is going to have an area where one player is stronger and another player is weaker.
Absolutely.
And don't get me wrong, I absolutely love this game. It was on my 10 by 10 this year. Just finished playing it 10 times, and I played it before that. And really enjoy it. I have all the pre-conclave content for it. I like it. I feel like I knew about this game before it came out, and that's rare that I can say that. And I felt like this game was made for me. I just want it to be exceptional. And I feel like there's a couple of things you can do differently in order to get that. Here's one that I think is pretty indefensible. And I understand that this is a logistical thing, but remember, you are sleeving up to 3 cards, possibly 4 with the Eclipse mechanic, which we'll go over maybe a little bit later, into a card. What that does is it makes the cards visually different. And when you're pushing, that is an issue because you could tell that if you are not buying decay symbols, you know you are not going to spoil. I think that what they should have done is they should have created blank, transparent cards that should go in every card. That way every card looks the same.
That would definitely solve the problem of being able to just simply glance at your on-deck card or cards like, just under that and be able to kind of know like, oh, this one's thicker than the other, so I know that it's probably that one card that I put 3 advancements on instead of, a bunch of the other ones I haven't put anything on. But I also think, one, that would increase the price, right, because we'd have to have a bunch of blank cards in there. And then 2, it would increase the fiddliness of the game because you'd have to pull something out before you could put something in. And while that doesn't seem like a big deal, remember you're pretty much buying advancements every turn. So that would be something you'd constantly be doing, is pulling out these blanks just so that your cards remain kind of uniform. And again, while that would be nice in like a perfect ideal situation, I don't see that being so nice that I would want to actually do that.
So I thought that you might mention the fiddliness, and that's why I actually had envisioned that it kind of would have been tacked on, so that you basically had something that you slide it in, where the actual height of the card is always the same, and it goes underneath it. That way, visually the card would always be the same.
Interesting.
But I understand that, yes, you want to keep the games as reasonable in cost as possible, but that is a noticeable issue, and I'm going to admit to having exploited that at least once in the past 24 hours.
If it can be exploited, Jim will do it.
No, it's not. I'm not a cheater. You have done it too. I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. That it's the unfortunate nature where you're looking at your on-deck card and it's like, I haven't bought any extra decay symbols. There's no way I'm going to push.
So there are a few things that, like I said, this is one of my all-time favorite games. There are over 700 games in my personal collection of games. For this to be in my top 5, that is a big deal, right? Okay, huge deal for it to be in my top 5. So excellent game. However, I do think there are some issues kind of like that that definitely stand out. I would not say that this game is perfect by any means. There are a couple of things about it that I think are universally understood by people who've played this, sometimes even just once, that there is kind of a problem. But it's still so good that I will ignore or deal with all the problems because I want to play this game.
So now I want to go back to Eric's comment about analysis paralysis. Because
And you're probably one of the people that I don't like playing this game with. Go ahead.
This game wastes an opportunity to introduce decisions. As a matter of fact, there are too little decisions in the game.
Okay, hang on. It wastes an opportunity
to introduce more decisions into the game.
Okay, and there are 2 distinct areas, you said?
Well, what I was going to say was that your turn is scripted. Your plant phase is scripted. And we've confirmed this with the designer himself, that you have to keep going until you have 3 actual decay symbols. And that drives me nuts. Every time I play this game, I wish the rule were different. Because
You wish you could just stop somewhere. At each,
you should be able to stop on your turn at any point. Now I want to say, in some of the expansions, there are cards that were introduced that say, gain X if you have less than 7 or 9 cards in your field. And that would make those cards too powerful. I would not have put those cards in the game knowing that that rule was in place. Because here's what happens. You are forced to continue, even if you do not want to. In every deck building game, one of the most important things to do is to manage when your discard pile refreshes. And because you have a tendency to get rid of your bad cards, what will happen is you have no reason to continue going on your turn, and you will be forced to flush your discard pile, which is all cursed lands at that point, all your decay symbols. And a good turn is going to be followed by 1 or 2 useless turns. It happens to me every game, and it drives me nuts. At some point, you should be able to stop. You're saying, I don't have anything I want to buy. Why am I going to waste good cards? If you know that there are, because a lot of cards combo together, if you know that there are 2 cards in your deck that you want to work out, by continuing, you are possibly opening the possibility that you're only going to see one of them, and you'll lose your combo. You should be able to stop. And unfortunately, the actual decisions don't come into effect. There's very few on-play cards, but the decision is pretty much automatic. Like, discard a card, you're going to discard a cursed land. It's very rare that you would actually discard a good card for whatever reason.
So what do you say? Hang on, let's catch our listeners up here. So if you're not familiar with the game, I'm going to back us up just a little bit. So Jim's saying that while we're planting into our field, you can come up with a number of cards that you would like to work off of each other, right? But you have to keep going. You have to keep putting those cards into your field, whether you want to or not, until you get that 3rd decay symbol. So, and then that's when you can decide to stop or to push. Now, if you have a good combo in your deck, Jim's saying that by doing that, by having to continue to put those cards out, we're losing the mathematical probability that we'll get those cards out at the same time when we want them to come out. If we could just stop at any time instead of having to wait for that third, then we would be able to maybe get that combo out the way we want.
Your turn is on autopilot. It's actually possible that you can bust and have nothing in your control about it. Now, the game says to never create a card with more than one decay symbol, but there are cards that have more than one decay symbol baked on them. And there are also a lot of cards that add extra decay that, you know, if you're trying to cancel it, well, you may set that up before you get the cancel card that will cancel all the symbols on it.
So in this case here, we have 2 decay in our field, right? And then we turn over a card where we have 1 decay that was on the card already, and then we added a second decay to it. We would automatically spoil at that point because there'd be 4 face-up decay in front of us, and none of it would be canceled out. So in this case here, we would automatically spoil, lose our turn. And the game does recommend that you do not put 2 decay on 1 card for this very reason, so that when that card does turn over, then you're going to lose your turn.
But then what you're doing instead is you're putting decay on every card, which means that you're just constantly cycling through.
I think that
buying decays are really good cards. What you're failing to do is land management.
Yeah.
This is basic land management where you've got to manage your fertile land and decay land.
So
I think you mean the growth, right? The growth and the
there is not that much growth in the game.
There's not.
And as a matter of fact,
especially in the base game, some of the expansions do increase it a little bit.
What this does is it makes growth bad, because growth then forces you to continue your turn, because you're showing 3, but you cancel out 1, and you have to keep going.
So I hear what you're saying. I'm not entirely sure that I'm willing to agree to that. I think I would need to play through that a few times, or maybe think about it a little harder. I don't know that I'm willing to jump right in and agree. I know what you're saying, but I don't know that I agree.
And you're saying that I'm failing this? I won 7 out of 10 times that I played this year. I'm pretty good at this game.
How many times have we played?
There's a reason for that.
What is that reason? Now that we're on the air?
You guys know what it is. You know what I'm talking about. So
earlier I was trying to interrupt you, and
analysis paralysis.
There's something else I want to talk about.
But I want to finish my point on this. There is
you don't get to talk.
There is not enough decisions, because essentially your decisions don't actually start until you reach your 3rd symbol, and then you have to decide. And most of the time, it's kind of an insignificant decision where it's like, no, I want to stop.
But I think you're missing the point that prior to that, you had decisions. So before I even start planting my field, I had decisions about what was going to be on my cards. Mm-hmm. And so in that case, I could have said, well, I'll pick this growth. I'd really rather have something else, but I'll pick this growth.
Right. But it limits your actual decisions in the game to 1 of the 4 phases. There are 4 phases in the game, and the majority of the decisions only actually occur during the purchasing phase. Whereas in every other deck builder game that I've played, there are decisions throughout. The order in which you play your cards, how far you want to go. In Dominion, which I play a ton of, there are definitely times when I have extra draw cards that I'm choosing not to play because I don't want to draw a bunch of actions and not have those cards at the start of my next turn. Mystic Vale throws that away completely. If it did that, this may be in my top 5 games. And I'm saying this as someone who really likes the game. It makes no sense that they would water down the number of decisions. It's a big deal for me. Every time I play it, I come to the same conclusion. And what it does is it makes you follow up a good turn with several really boring turns.
Like I said, I see your point. I'm not entirely willing to concede it. I think I would have to consciously focus while I played out, keeping that point in mind the whole time to decide how I felt about it. But I can see where you're coming from. I would like to maybe try house ruling it where you could stop at any time and see if that doesn't just completely break the game, because I feel like it could. I feel like that could completely break everything good about the game.
So now you have something you want to bring up.
Okay, so earlier when you're saying there are some decisions that can be made when you play a card, such as when played, you may discard a card. You said that it makes you only discard bad cards, but could you give me an example of when you would discard a good card?
I'm saying you really wouldn't.
Exactly. No, in any game, what time would you discard a good card?
Smash up.
Which card?
Many.
I don't remember that being in any of the cards. Wait, we
Spectre,
got all the
Spectre, Tenacious Z, a card you're going to be playing from your discard pile.
I
Okay.
immediately felt
Okay.
shameful that we started talking about Smash Up in the middle
He
of talking
asked
about another
he
game.
Asked he asked the question. I'm going to answer it.
Okay, so there are a few.
What?
There are a few. So what you're saying is Mystic Vale needs good cards that can be discarded.
That is a design space for the game, but one that is completely out of sync with everything else because it's all about the field. Now, the one example I would probably think of is that there are cards that would restrict the number, specifically the cards that restrict the size. Those are really hard to use. I could potentially see discarding a good card in order to get to stop your turn to get the number of cards lower, but it's more likely that the card that you're discarding would provide more value than having one less card in your field. It would be very specific. More often than not, it's what card has the most decay and has no other value provided. That's the one I'm jettisoning.
I feel like, again, I'm not willing to make any statements here that I resolutely stand behind until I've actually tried this or played through it with this in mind. But I feel like I think you probably have a good point here in that there is a lack of solid decision making throughout the entire process of your turn. However, I feel like there is enough good decision making available to us, especially with some of the content from the expansions and stuff, that I don't care if there's not valuable decision making throughout the rest of the process, because I have enough of it in the one part where I do have control over the decision making that I don't need it elsewhere.
I'm gonna have to agree to disagree. Like I said, this is my biggest issue. Well, there's one logistical thing with the game, which I'm sure we're gonna get to in a second. But if Mystic Vale were to change that rule, then this game easily goes into my top 10, possibly into my top 5, because I actually have control over my turn. The game doesn't feel like it's playing me. I feel like I'm playing the game at all times. I really hate it. I'm going to use an analogy. On Star Realms, the app has a bug in it. There's a defect. You don't have to play all your cards in Star Realms. I've confirmed this in the rulebook, but the app forces you to. And there are times it forces me to draw a card and shuffle my discard pile and basically make me lose access to all my cards in play that will then go into my discard pile and not be in my deck. And it drives me absolutely nuts. Because at that point, I'm saying, no, I am choosing not to do something, and the game is forcing me to do it anyway. And unfortunately, Mystic Vale does that.
So, one of the points I want to make is you're talking about how all your decisions are in the buying phase, correct?
The majority of them are,
The majority
yes.
of them are. But I've seen people take just as long deciding if they're going to push or not. Then you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know exactly the situation of the day. Yes, you know everything, and it's. I think you were there, but you weren't watching, or you weren't there yet.
I know what you're talking about.
They can take forever thinking, am I going to push or not? And then they count, and then they look, and they're triple counting. Like, I'm pretty sure you're smart enough to know how to count to like freaking 10. You know, you got this already. You passed kindergarten. All right, congratulations. Push or not, but make your decision. You know what I mean? And then they take like half that time to pick the 2 cards that they wanted, and you're like, really? Was that so difficult? So no, I think if anything, they push too much. I would actually take away the ability to push. If I had to,
No,
the ability to
no.
push, the ability to push is a major part of the decision making.
I do understand that it's a major part of the decision making, but some people, I just want to be like, you can't push anymore. You're driving me nuts.
If you can't push, then you can't spoil, and then you invalidate half the cards. You invalidate the amulets,
and you also invalidate the interest of getting this card on my.
You can get that. You can get that decayed out for your next round.
Well, not only that, but like my on deck card. Oh man, I really want this level 2 advancement that would be sleeved in the top slot. Well, none of my cards in my field have a top slot open, but my on deck card does. So should I push it into here, hoping that I don't spoil, so that I can get this one card I really want and put it in an available spot? I think there's a lot of decision
limit to
making.
one push, because people push and then they push again.
So you're saying like if you had
and they keep pushing and you're like just.
that does not happen as often as you think.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of disagree on this point.
No, that happens plenty.
I think the pushing thing.
Because there's a hard limit on the number of times you can push, and there are 9 decay symbols. So like if you are at a certain point, you are running out of times when you're actually going to be able to push.
And even if you've already canceled out all of your decay because you bought growth, then at most you can just play out however many cards were in your draw pile. And even if you started with a brand new draw pile, that's 20 cards. So at most, even if I'm having like a stellar turn, I can still only play out 20 cards. So,
but each time they have that decision. So what my point is, because they're making that decision every single time, if you turn it, if you change the game to where each card that you put in your field, that you have a decision, that is going to increase the length of the game exponentially.
This is not a long game by any stretch of the imagination.
I think, again, we're back to one of those things where this is based on the idiosyncrasy of the player.
Someone could spend, so if the game lasts like, say, 40 minutes, someone like me might spend, if it's a two-player game, might spend, 5 of it on my turn, and the rest 35 minutes on someone else's turn, taking forever.
You play with the wrong people,
I do play with the wrong people, which is why some games don't make it to the top 10.
Play 10-game real-time games only with these people then, because it's like I'm saying, I consider myself to be a rational player who does not take long turns by any stretch of the imagination. I short-circuit a lot of my decisions, and I wish Mystic Vale had a little bit more. Now, the other thing.
Now, how many of the expansions have you actually added?
I have the first 3, and I plan on getting the Conclave box, but I want to put it in this box because box is too big.
And you have all of your expansions in the base game box?
Yes.
I mean,
and you want to put Conclave in there?
What?
Coming up a little bit.
Yeah,
already.
I see that.
It's not going down.
Well, good luck with that. I don't recommend that.
I'm going to remove the insert and actually create a custom insert.
Oh, okay, all right, custom insert. I thought you were just going to dump everything in there.
No,
that was going to hurt.
not.
That was going to hurt.
Very organized. You should see the number of bags that I have.
Oh, I know he's organized.
No.
More bags than regular.
And this is where my lack of Conclave knowledge is going to hurt me. But right now, the other logistical issue I have with the game is that the cards have no indication as to what set they've come from, and the game wants you to mix everything together, and that actually dilutes your strategy because you don't know what's coming, and you're kind of improvising the entire game.
Conclave, so there are no set symbols or like expansion symbols or anything like that on any of the cards. So if you mix together the base game and even just one expansion, and then you decide that you want to take out an expansion or something, play with only the base game or play with the base game and like this other expansion or whatever, you actually have to go track down a list of all the cards. This is ridiculous. I hate doing this. You have to track down a list of all the cards from the base game and whatever expansions you've mixed in, and then you have to sit there and manually separate all the cards because there's no set symbols or there's no distinguishing marks at all for the cards from the expansions. That does totally suck. Now, there is a thing in the Conclave where they've included these, they're tarot-sized cards. There are several dividers and stuff like that in the Conclave. So these just kind of, they're the same size, they fit in the same places and everything. They're these tarot-sized cards where it's like a grouping of particular cards that you can pull out of all the cards that you have, and you can say, okay, well, we're going to play with these, I don't remember how many it is, it's like 3 or 6 cards or whatever. We're going to play with these 3 or 6 cards, and we're going to use all the cards from just these. So then you go through the box, and again, this is not fun. This is incredibly tedious to do this. But you go through all of the cards and you pull out all the ones from these cards. So they'll say, oh, you need, this level 1, 2, and 3 advancement. You need this veil. You need this, level 1, 2, and 3 advancement. So you pull all that out and then you just play with that from whatever cards you selected to play with. And that is really, really cool. There's some neat stuff there because it forces you into some different styles of play than you would get if you just kind of dumped everything on the table, or even if you just played like the base game or the base game in a particular expansion or something like that. It forces you into these paradigms. These themed paradigms where you're playing with a certain mechanic is really brought to the forefront, like the guardian symbol maybe, or the spirit symbols or things like that. And that is insanely cool. It's probably one of my favorite parts of the Conclave. However, because of the lack of set symbols or distinguishing marks on the cards, the amount of time that you have to spend to set that up is ludicrous.
So actually, when I bought the expansions, I went and I indexed all the cards and created my own file. So I have a copy of every card and what expansion it comes from.
Oh, that's cool.
And we'll share that with everybody. I'll figure out a place to put it online. But and what I recommend for people is play with one expansion at a time until you set that up. Yeah. Because what will happen is because there's so many cards and you're not going to be using many of them. In fact, with the level 1 advancements, you're only supposed to put out like 12 for 2 players, and each one comes with about 30.
Yeah.
And so you might have like 90 cards and you'll use 12 of them. So just use them one at a time. It makes it a lot easier to sort when you're only sorting between 2 things.
It's also going to, it will make your experience with the game better if you only consume the content from one expansion at a time, because the expansions are completely built around highlighting a particular mechanic of the game or some synergy or something like that. And if you shuffle all the cards in together and then you randomly pick 12, that will be completely lost.
So let's talk about the expansions themselves, because I'm of the opinion that if you like Mystic Vale, if you like the idea of Mystic Vale, go ahead and actually purchase at least one expansion with the game and experience them together. This is a great game to demo on someone else's copy, because I think the base game won't give you the best feeling that you can get. I definitely agree with playing with the leaders. They're not a lot of overhead. Play with them right away. What I really like about the expansion is how you can tell, looking at the cards, if you see enough of them, you can tell this card belongs to this expansion because they're so cohesive. For example, Mana Storm has all of the red negative victory points, cards that are good but will cost you in the long run. And I really like the cancellation effects in the first expansion.
So the base game, it has some fairly basic iconography to it. It goes through a list of like, this is all the different icons you'll see in the game. Well, with each expansion, they have increased that just a little bit. They'll add 1 or 2 new symbols, and one of the symbols that Jim is talking about is they have negative victory points on the card. So typically, you'll play a card and it will either be worth some endgame points or it will generate some victory points for you on the turn that it's played. But in one of the expansions, they've actually added some negative victory point symbols, and then they've also added, what are the black ones? Do you remember what those are called?
They're black. I don't remember what they're called, but they are negative VP that you accrued during the game, as opposed to at the end of the game.
Right. So the red negative ones are only for end game. At the end of the game, you go through your deck, you add up all your victory points, you add up all of your negative victory points. That gives you part of your score, right? Well, the black victory point symbols, there's actually a token pool of black victory points now, and every time you play that card, you get a black victory point token instead of the normal nice blue ones that are actually worth points. And then the black ones at the end of the game, if you can't get rid of them, are worth negative points as well. So just having the slightly different iconography, having the black versus the red versus the blue, it completely changes some of your strategies, some of what the cards do, all of that, just by having some slightly different iconography and slightly different pieces and stuff as you play. Hang on one second. Nikki, would you please grab me the conclave? Can you open up the conclave and hand me all of the instruction books that are on the top for the expansions?
Why don't I bring the giant box and show people just how massive this thing is?
Let's do that.
It's the size of the bigger, geekier box for the most part.
Oh.
Bigger, geekier box is actually a little bit bigger. So this beautiful thing is the conclave.
And this is why I want to keep my old box.
It is big. It is heavy. But it is filled with beautiful things. And I wanted to pull this out.
Slowly rise the box.
I wanted to pull this out because I wanted to show you some of the expansion rule books, because this will show you what the box tops look like. I don't have the boxes anymore for my expansions because I got rid of them and put them all in here. So we don't have a top-down camera, do we?
No.
Okay, so I'll just do this. So there are several expansions. This was the first one to come out, Veil of Magic. This one just included some new cards. It didn't increase the strategies in the game or introduce any new rules or anything like that. This one just had some new cards. After that, they came out with
Veil of the Wild.
Veil of the Wild. This one here was the next expansion. Now, this one did have a couple of new things with it, including, I think, a few leaders, right?
Yes.
And also,
No, the amulets came in Mana Storm.
Okay, all right, so this one had the leaders. The leaders are cards that you can choose to play with or not, that are sleeved into blank cards in your deck, and when they come out, they offer some powerful abilities, but also some tough choices sometimes.
Play with
Probably
them.
my favorite
Yes,
expansion.
play with them. They are very
Get
cool.
that expansion first, and play with them always, because you'll find that the leader
Changes your strategy completely.
drives
Yeah.
exactly what cards you want.
Yeah, yeah. And it will help if you are playing with people with AP or maybe even some new players or things like that. This is a big open world, especially with all this content in here, and the leaders can really help provide some direction for the strategies that you want to employ in that particular game.
They also help handicap an experienced player, because you
Yes.
can say, I'm going to give you this great leader, and I'm going to take this fairly useless leader.
Yeah.
You know which one I'm talking about, people. You'll know it when you see it.
All right, then the next expansion to come out was Mana Storm. This one, it brought in some more new leaders, and it also introduced these things called amulets. The amulets were cards that you would have in play always, kind of like your Veils. They would be played off to the side from the very beginning of the game. And they would give you, again, some powerful abilities, but sometimes they would also kind of shackle you a little bit too. This one, I would say buy after you buy Veil of the Wild. So buy Veil of the Wild first, then buy Mana Storm, and then if you just stupid love this game, go ahead and go back and buy Veil of Magic.
One of the great things about Mana Storm is that the actual Veil cards in it, they are game changers. They are like, that is not just a Veil that is worth victory points or it gives me a spirit symbol. It is like, okay, that is telling me what I'm going to do for the rest of the game.
Yeah.
Mana Storm is phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's where it shows you that the game still has a long way to go in terms of mining its design space.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was saying earlier about how we may be limited to our choices at different phases of our turn, but there's so much going on with this game, and there's so many fun things to kind of work together to kind of synergize. There are so many things to see if you can kind of like push the strategies and make it work, that it's really fun. So the next expansion to come out was the Conclave, which is this ginormous box here. It doesn't include a whole lot of expansion material, but it does have some really cool stuff in it. So this takes the game from being a 2 to 4 player game to being a 2 to 6 player game. It also includes those cards I was saying. Here's one right here. So if I wanted to play with the Seekers of the Sun, for example, it would tell me which base game Veils I would need, which ones for Mana Storm. So I can go through here and I can pick out all these cards, and this combined with several more of these will give me an entirely different play experience than I've had previously. It also includes the Equinox variant, which they have recommended that you use if you're going to play a 5 or 6 player game. Equinox is not my favorite. Like I said, it really cuts down on the player interaction in the game, but it does speed up the game. And when you're playing with 6 players, especially if anybody has AP, that can be really nice. What else new was in Conclave?
What do they call it? The totems?
Yes, I don't know that this came in Conclave. It might have, but there's a totem card. It's a set of cards that you get at the beginning of the game. Yep, yeah, it is from this expansion. So there's a set of cards that you get at the beginning of the game here. This I mixed up with the amulets. No, I didn't. No, I did not. So there's amulets and then there are totems, and they function similarly. But this adds a whole nother level of variation to your setup. And since everyone has, this kind of introduces like variable player powers a little bit at the beginning of the game. So after Conclave, they came out with Twilight Garden, and this is the most recent expansion. Twilight Garden was a new core set. So you can play with all the expansions with Twilight Garden, or you can play with all the expansions with the regular base game, or you can mix and match any of this that you want to. Twilight Garden, to me, really felt like a kind of a reworking of some of the basics of the game. It introduced a lot of interesting things that I was super happy I had the foundations of the base game already under my belt before we got into stuff from Twilight Garden, but it kind of felt like it took the game back to the beginning a little bit, and it kind of refreshed and freshened up some of the mechanics and strategies from the base game for me.
I've only played the one time with you, and we're going to come back and do a part 2 where we talk specifically about Conclave and Twilight Garden, but I did put it on my wish list, and I'm going to make a bold prediction that I'm getting at least one of these two for Christmas.
All right, so that's kind of an overview of all of the product that has come out for the game.
What is your favorite player count for Mr. Vale?
Well, it's interesting at different player counts. I like having the higher player counts because I'm sharing the game that I really, really like with more people. But I think honestly for me, I would prefer kind of a quiet, more of like a chess match type game where it's just me and one or two other players. I think that you can really dig into what other players are doing, the fewer people that you have to keep track of. And for me, that's part of the fun of this game, is kind of tracking, okay, you bought that Vale, which means that you're going to be able to do this and this and this if I let you have this advancement or something like that. And to me, that adds a layer to the game that I enjoy quite a bit. And I would rather do that than just kind of tune out everybody else's turns, which is kind of what I do if there's a higher player count. So.
What's your favorite player count with this?
I would actually go with 3. I know in other games I usually like a higher player count, but I think 3 really works well because there's less waiting, and because there's so little that you can do to influence other people besides buying cards, that once you go beyond 3, there's really no additional benefit.
I would say that I'm primarily 2, but I like to play with 3, particularly because there are some leaders that will affect the player to your left and right, and those leaders go down significantly when there's only one person to choose from.
Oh yeah, yeah, I agree. And it's kind of nice when you're playing with 3 with those leaders in play, that you're playing and your card affects everyone at the table instead of like 2 of the 3 players at the table, 2 of the 3 other players at the table. Because if you're constantly targeting the player to your left and right and never bothering with the person across from you, and then those players are not bothering with them either, then you're really targeting these players significantly and nobody's messing with this guy. So, and I think that's not unfair, right? Because these 2 players could choose to target them if they so choose. But I think it just creates a little bit more level of a playing field, which means that when I beat you, I did it well and I deserve that victory. So.
There's also something about the VP ratio because it scales up in terms of 5 VP tokens per player added. And with 4 players, when you're adding a 4th player, but you're only adding 5, then you can conceivably go from there's 20 crystals to there's none. And if you're the first player and like all of a sudden the game just ends before you have another turn.
That's true.
Yeah.
So the game, there's a countdown timer to the game, and it's that at the beginning of the game, not only do you set out a certain number of level 1 advancements to buy, and then when those are gone, they're gone, but you also set up a pool of the victory point crystals, and that counts as the end game timer. When you run out of those crystals, then everyone gets an equal number of turns back to the start player and the game ends. So like Jim's saying, if you're playing with a higher number of players and the victory point pool starts to rapidly deplete after you've played your turn that round, then the game could end and you wouldn't even get another turn, which would be disappointing, but it's more so when you thought you probably would get another turn and then you just don't.
So anything else you want to say about this?
I love this game. Play it. It's super, super fun. I know we've mentioned a couple of things that we didn't quite like about it, but that's because I love it enough to where I want you to enjoy it and I want you to experience it. And I want to be upfront with you about the things that I think are weaknesses in the game, because overlook those. It's amazing. I love it. Try it out. It's really fun.
So for me, this is not a game, this is a system. This is the Mystic Vale system, and these are, modules that slide in perfectly into the system. The reason why I'm very passionate about what I consider to be weaknesses of the game is because they can change. Rules can evolve over time. We've seen it with Smash Up, probably more than we'd like to see it actually, if I'm being honest, where rules change over time. I have high expectations for this game. It's great, I love it, I definitely recommend doing it. Even despite everything I said, if people were to say, hey, do you want to play Mystic Vale? My answer is probably going to be, yes, let's go ahead and play it, particularly if you already know how to play. I just want the best for it. And I think that, for the players who don't like this game, they may be seeing some of the same things that I'm seeing. And I'd just like to see that fixed. Your final thoughts?
No. You want to play Mystic Vale?
Sure.
Let's go.
All right.